Today our first topic is challenges and opportunities. They sound like two completely opposite things. A challenge, a problem, something negative, an opportunity, wow, that's something very positive. But when we take a closer look at some of the challenges, we see that they're not really diametrically opposite. They're not quite what they seem to be at first sight. I'll start with the story first. This was in 1922. Europe was in the first of its post-war depression, and Czechoslovakia's economy was in ruins. Its exports were drastically cut. There was widespread unemployment. The newly formed Czech government adopted tight monetary controls to fight inflation. The currency was devalued by 75%. People's purchasing power declined, and most businesses, they had a very high level of debt. They had fallen incomes. Production declined, and so they were forced to lay off, and that resulted in greater unemployment, greater difficulties for everyone. Now, in this situation, Bata Shoes, it was a mid-sized manufacturing company producing footwear. The company also suffered badly, just like, everything else, everybody else in the country then. Thomas Bata, he saw his exports drop by 75%. Stocks were accumulating in the warehouses were overflowing, and there was enormous pressure to lay off workers, to cut down production. Now, in this setting, there was a National Manufacturers Association meeting in Czechoslovakia, and all the leading businessmen, the manufacturers, they all came together to decide what to do, how to tackle this problem. And the one thing that was common in all that they said, in all the speeches that were made, in the general feeling was a sense of helplessness. They were all victims of much greater powers. All of Europe had been at war, and now entire European economy was ruined. Their own economy was in shambles. And so what could they do? They felt the government was not doing enough. They needed more relief from the government. They were all condemning the government, saying it was not doing enough. They need to bail us out. We need relief. We are helpless. We can't help laying off workers. So on and so forth. Everybody told the same line. Now it was Thomas Bata's turn to speak. He saw the futility in the government's policy. Not just that, he also saw the futility in how everybody else was handling the situation. You can go on complaining, you can say, oh well, this is the problem, it's coming to us from outside, we can do nothing, what do we do? That was what everybody was doing, but it was not getting anybody anywhere. And so he thought differently. And so he made some announcements. He got up, he spoke, and he said, let's stop blaming the government, let's stop blaming the economy, let's stop blaming the war. And he said, let's act courageously. Let's get together for our own preservation. And he made some very dramatic announcements. He said, I am not going to lay off a single worker. He was so deeply committed to his workers. He said, I am not going to lay off a single person. This was quite shocking because it looked like there was no other alternative for all the manufacturers. And then he said, I'm going to cut down the price of the footwear that I produce by half. There was a hushed silence in the room. Nobody was quite sure they had heard it right. He was not going to lay off a single person when everybody was laying off workers. And he was actually reducing the price by half, 50%. How can this be affordable? First, everybody was very quiet. They weren't sure they had heard it right. And then there was derisive laughter. They dismissed him as a lunatic, as a fool. This is not practical at all. He's not going to get anywhere. But I didn't find it funny. He was serious. He knew what he was saying and he knew what he was going to do. And He went back to his company and he announced this to his employees. He said, look, now we're good. The war created this, but now let's start functioning on a war footing. He announced to everybody up front, I am not laying off a single person because all the employees, their families were dependent on this company, on this employment for their livelihood, for their survival. And so he said, I will not lay off a single person, but then he said he was reducing the salary by 40% all across the board. And at the same time, he was committed to the workers. He wanted to ensure their survival, their welfare. So he also promised the essential necessities, food, clothing, everything else that was essential, at a reduced price, at half the price. There was opposition from the union, but he said, see, if we don't do this, we will have to shut down, you will all be laid off, and that will be the end. So you have a choice. So it was this crisis actually which made him say this. And there were a number of other changes that he made in the company. Wastage of all types had to be reduced. Costs had to be minimized. And he divided the factory into various profit centers and he incentivized productivity. And once he did this within his factory, he launched a poster campaign. The posters had the image of a huge fist that would crush the Czech word for that meant the high cost of living. And he advertised that he was cutting the price of all footwear by 50%. The public response was overwhelming. The shops had been empty, the warehouses had been full, and now it became just the opposite. People rushed to the stores. In fact, at one point, the police had to be called to control the mob because there was such a rush to actually go to the shop because it was now being given at half the price actually. And so, in 1 week, this sense of uncertainty, of despair had been transformed. It had been replaced by a sense of urgency, of excitement, and of purpose. And so, it just took 1 week and this one man's decision to do something different, to just stop complaining, to stop saying, oh, we are helpless, we can't do anything, it's all these forces from the outside. Instead, he said, let's try and do something. And once he decided that, a number of options actually came into view and he was able to implement them. And in the coming months, Bata not only maintained full employment, they actually started to expand. And over the next 5 years, employment doubled in the Bata factories and production multiplied 15-fold. So he had the last laugh. Everybody laughed at him when he said, I'm going to do something different. I won't lay off anybody. I'll cut the prices. And when he went ahead and did all these changes, when he stopped saying, oh, this is a huge challenge, nothing can come out of it, he decided he would do something different. And he was very, very successful. And between 1922, when all this began, and 1932, the wages in the factories rose by 200%. The retail price of the shoes fell by 82%. And just 6 years after this began, Bata operated the largest tanneries, shoemaking factories, and shoe machinery industry in North. Czechoslovakia began to lead the world in footwear exports. So it's quite amazing when you look at it. There was this huge problem, not just Bata, but all the factories in the country were facing huge problems. Everybody felt helpless. Everybody said, this is nothing that we can do anything about. Oh, all of these forces from the outside are compelling us. We are helpless. They all felt like victims. It was this challenge, it was these challenging times that made Bata say, let's stop doing this. Let's stop looking at it as a problem. And once he stopped that, he said, let's try and solve this. Let's all work together for our preservation. Yes, the economy is like this. Yes, the war did this. Yes, the government is unable to do anything more for us, or it's not doing anything more for us. But let's stop saying that. Let's try and see what we can do about this. And he was able to make this change. History is full of such stories. Challenges and opportunities, they're not exactly antonyms, but they look like they mean totally opposite things. But there are many instances in history where it is out of the challenge that a huge opportunity arose. And looking back, it looks like if it had not been for the challenge, nobody would have cited this opportunity. This huge thing that came out of this problem would not have come out at all. I would like to just give one more story, and if any of you can think of anything here online, it would be most welcome. I will just go into one more instance where an entire country, a huge famine was actually prevented. It looked like there was going to be a major human disaster, but this crisis was totally converted into a huge opportunity for an entire nation and in fact impacted the rest of the world as well. This was in India, what we now call the Indian Green Revolution, that transformed the country from a starving nation to an exporter of food. In the 1950s, because of improved medical facilities, life-saving drugs and vaccination, there was a huge population explosion in India in the 1950s. And so there was perennial food shortage. All of these mouths to be fed, there was always not enough food. And India met this need by massive imports of food at concessional prices from the US. And in the mid-1960s, this problem was aggravated because India faced a drought for two consecutive years. And so this severe drought resulted in very acute food shortage. It was a period when the country is supposed to have led a ship-to-mouth existence. We say hand to mouth. At that time it was ship to mouth. The ships brought the food from the US mainly, and from there it would go straight to the mouths of the people. So India at that time was set to lead a ship to mouth existence. And at one point, the food stocks in India were there only for 2 weeks, and there was nothing else in the pipeline. And after this, the FAO estimated that this famine could take up to 10 million lives in the country. Things got so bad that the Prime Minister at that time, Shastri, he called upon all Indians to miss one meal every week. He said, let's stop eating, let's start eating a little less because we don't have much. There is food only for 2 weeks. There is nothing else in the pipeline. There are no more ships coming which will reach us at the end of 2 weeks. Where will we go for food? So skip a meal, at least one meal a week. Things had got so bad and it looked like there were going to be 10 million deaths out of this famine. Now, this is a huge crisis, a challenge. No matter how you look at it, I don't know, and many people would have been able to see an opportunity in a famine that would lead to the death of 10 million people. And so, how was this handled? How did this challenge, how did this crisis get solved? And more so, how was this converted into a challenge? This was in 1966 when there was an impending famine. And the Prime Minister, he asked C. Subramaniam, whom I mentioned briefly as a great personality. He had been a freedom fighter, then he became a statesman. So the Prime Minister asked CS to take over as the Minister for Food and Agriculture. Accepting this portfolio was tantamount to ending one's career because anybody who was in charge of food and agriculture had failed before. You take up this food, the ministry, you fail, and then that was the end. Everybody criticized the minister. That was the end of the career. So it actually even required courage to take up this portfolio of food. He did that. CS did that. And then he came up with a lot of very revolutionary ideas with some very great ideas. He said, let's import hybrid seeds. Hybrid seeds had been tested successfully in Mexico by Dr. Norman Borlaug, who later went on to win the Nobel Prize for this. And so he said, let's import those seeds and let's cultivate them in India. It would have seemed like a very, very logical step, but there was a lot of opposition. This required a lot of money. The finance minister said that's too expensive. And then after that, CS said, see, if this fails in our country, if the farmers incur a loss doing this, then there will have to be security for that also. There should be finance to bail out the farmers in case the whole thing actually becomes a failure. There was no success guaranteed, so there was a lot of investment to be made. The finance minister was unwilling. The opposition, maybe just for the sake of opposing, they said, no, this won't work out. What is this? You bring crops from seeds from Mexico, they may work in Mexico, but India is so different from Mexico. The weather, the climate, the geographic conditions, they're also different. How do we know they will work? How do we know this has just been tested? The opposition had actually organized 1,000 demonstrations all over the country opposing this. In fact, there was even opposition from the ministry, from the cabinet colleagues themselves. And many of the agriculture scientists, they came up with different reasons why it wouldn't work out. The farmers were hesitant to do something new. They had traditionally been using some seeds, and they said something that comes from some country named Mexico. No, what's this? The wheat looks different. It's the wrong size. It's the wrong shape. It's the wrong color. We will not eat it. The people will not buy this wheat. There was opposition from all sides. The Prime Minister had said, CS, look, you take over this ministry and do something about it. But then at every step, he faced opposition, he faced challenges, but he was willing to take up all this. He announced in the parliament that India would be self-sufficient in food within 5 years. Now, a country that was leading what was called the ship-to-mouth existence to become self-sufficient in food in 5 years, it seemed amazing. It seemed so fantastic that not too many people even believed CS. But he went ahead. He was not concerned with the opposition. He was determined. He came from a farming family. He knew what he was doing. He knew what he wanted to do. He said, I'm going to prevent this famine. Not just that. I'm going to go on and make India self-sufficient first, maybe an exporter of food later, but this problem we're going to solve. And the seeds were imported from Mexico. They were in fact brought in by air because there wasn't enough time to bring them by ship. It's all very well that seeds are coming, but then what do you do after 2 weeks? You need food. There was food only for 2 weeks. And so CS went to the US, President Johnson at that time. He agreed to export food to the country because it was an emergency. But CS said that's not enough. If you send food now, by the time it reaches India, we will already be starving. So whatever food you've already sent out to other places, food that's already on the ships in the high seas, please redirect them. Send them immediately to India because this is an emergency, it's a national emergency. Seeing how critical it was, the President agreed and ships were redirected to India. But to get all these ships to come to the ports, to transfer all this food, India did not have the infrastructure, the facility in the ports actually to even take all these foods from the ships, transfer it. And so India came into an arrangement with the neighboring countries. They used their ports. The ships came to the ports in India, to the neighboring countries, and then from there the food was transported to India. So sometimes the closest neighbor, Pakistan actually. So the enmity at that time, they overcame that because of the crisis. So that food, it took care of the immediate need, but CS didn't stop at that. So because we're talking about how a challenge is converted into an opportunity, not just solved temporarily. This C. Subramaniam, he revamped the agriculture education in the country. He was planning for the long term and he shifted focus to high priority areas. and he set up a fertilizer corporation, and then he insisted that the government establish a food corporation. When a farmer produces a lot, the price tends to come down. So there is no incentive for the farmer to produce more. And he said the food corporation must purchase food from the farmers, surplus food from the farmers, and sell it in food deficit areas. So the farmer is guaranteed a minimum price. Even if he produces more, the price won't go below that. So there is incentive to produce more. And food grain production, it went up by 50% in 5 years. In fact, he personally used these seeds, and he used a 5-acre plot in his house, and he planted the seeds there, and this was a huge success. So he called all his colleagues, his ministers, his opposition, and he said, see, this is a success here in my house, why can't it be a success all throughout the country? That convinced a lot of people, and slowly, as people began to see that this was a success, everybody accepted it, the farmers accepted the seeds, and in 5 years, the production rose by 50%, and in 10 years, India was able to double its food production. So this was a huge success. It looked like 10 million people in India were going to die of famine. And out of this very challenge came this huge opportunity which CS took, and he launched the Green Revolution. And this was not just a question of food. People were starving and people got enough food. This actually had a ripple effect. As a byproduct of this revolution, many lateral industries flourish. When there is a lot of food growing, there are so many other industries that are related to it. Like, for example, all of these high yield varieties, they needed a lot of water, and more fertilizer was required, more pesticides were required, and so this spurred industrial growth. It provided local employment, it created more jobs, it contributed to the country's GDP. There was more water needed, more dams were constructed, and this water was used to produce even hydroelectric energy. And that energy had in turn boosted industrial growth. So just this one man who launched the Green Revolution, he said, let's stop waiting for these food to come from the ships. Let's take this challenge. Let's convert it into an opportunity. Let's do something about it. Let's solve this. Instead of just waiting and saying, oh, there's no rain this year, there is drought, there's going to be a famine. Let's go ask for aid from the World Bank, from the US government. Let's do something. Let's convert this challenge into an opportunity. And he not only saved the famine, but he led to even industrial growth, created more jobs, it improved the quality of life of the people in the villages. India was able to pay back all the loans that it had taken from the World Bank for the purpose. This improved the country's credit worthiness. And what is more, even some developed countries like Canada that were facing a shortage of agriculture labor, they saw what was happening and they approached the Indian government and they said, can you send us some of your farmers who are experienced in this green revolution? And so a number of farmers from the North Indian states were sent to these countries, especially Canada. And so you see a lot of them there. That not only transformed their lives, but it had an impact on their hometown as well. And the lives of Indians of the entire country, it was changed. And all of this came from this one challenge. If it had not been for this intense pressure, this famine that was facing the entire country, if it had not been for the fact that 10 million lives were going to be lost in this famine, there would not have been the incentive to go on and do this. There would not have been that intensity to overcome all resistance. When you're facing such a huge problem, you just brush away all resistance. That strength comes. And it was this very, very huge challenge that CS was able to take, convert it into an opportunity. So the Green Revolution, it not only solved this problem of famine, it went on to create opportunities for so many Indians, for the entire country. These are just two examples, two very, very big examples. The what Thomas Bata did during the post-war depression, how he turned around the company and it had an impact on the economy. And this one, an even larger one, it staved off famine and industrialized the country. It made it self-sufficient in food, and it also made India an exporter of food. So this is how actually many challenges in history have been converted into opportunities. And I want all of us to take a moment just to look at the challenges that we have faced earlier, challenges that have been converted into opportunities. And that leads to the most important question. What about the challenges that we face today? These are not just examples in history that we are looking at. This is for our accomplishment at the personal level. Our challenges may be some very small, minor ones. It may be at the national level. The entire country may be facing a challenge. It may be a challenge at the global level, something like global warming, the rising of the sea level that the entire country is facing. So, how do we look at these challenges? This challenge we see can be converted into an opportunity. Not only can it be solved, we can do more than that. We can take the challenge and use this intensity that the challenge generates, and we can go on and make it an opportunity. So it's a new vision with which to see the challenges that we face today. Bata didn't say, oh, look at this government, look what it's doing, look at the war, it was all so wrong, and look what it did to us. So, can we look at the challenges that we face today and try and find if there is some solution? Maybe it is this challenge that is going to do something productive might come out of it. I keep going back to what Alina said on the first day about the challenge that the country is facing that has brought out the patriotism in everybody. So, are there any more examples, maybe in the past, where challenges were converted? Anybody has anything to say? Yes.
Okay, thank you. First, it's very interesting topic that you opened already. We need to think out of the box. That's actually everything. Yesterday when Jerry spoke about Russia and NATO, that's actually really to think out of the box.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really unique example in NATO community. Somebody spoke about maybe we need to put Russia as a member in NATO. If you have the Russia in NATO, you don't have actually any more problems with Russia or Russia with NATO. Nobody is afraid. I think it's an everyday situation, so try to think out of the box. Of course, this is more easy for people not to think at all. You have one usual behavior, you use it every day.
Yes.
It was same by your mother, and actually that's fine. I tell you, your mother was a good lady, you try to be a good lady too, and you have the same principles. This is, of course, the easiest way, and I think this is, by most people, the lifestyle. You do that what your parents does, or your nation does, or you are actually only one of the millions. To be totally different, you need to be with high potential, with vision. And maybe it's very important to say with courage. Without courage, you can't say, oh, look, it's really great opinion, I really support your idea, but maybe we need to take another look. Please try to look at it differently. Especially if you know that after you say that, many people will attack you because they are not able to see that. And they are not able because they are closed in their minds. And we need to open the minds. this story what you mentioned about India and the Green Revolution is of course great, but you need to have someone with vision.
Yes.
Who will say, okay, look guys, everything what you do, it's great, but please, we need maybe to do it on another way. And that's of course not easy. To change society, to change one behavior, tradition. Many people are very happy to belong to some tradition without thinking what this tradition means. And tradition is of course great, thank God, but you can't forget for progress, because only progress will give you a future, not tradition. Tradition will bring us to the past, not to the future.
Very interesting. Just talk about a lot of research there is in style of attachment, the maternal bonding with the children from the very beginning, since in the womb, and also a lot of research on stress and eustress, people that are resilient. Because it's fascinating to see, as you exemplify, how many, if you really think, example of people that when faced with a challenge actually flourish, that a challenge is often an opportunity. But unfortunately, in my impression, and also in the literature, they are much less in number of the opposite, of people that have learned helplessness, and that not only in challenge they flounder, but even in daily life they actually are a burden to themselves and to others. In my opinion, for example, in my field, that is mental health, we see that there are possibility of promoting change and having people that are dysfunctional to become more functional, also excellent. And you can take a person and help that person to change if there is motivation. But the most important ingredient in change is not to arrive too late when people already are not functional, but to have parents to know how they would help their children to be resilient or to develop potentiality, to be creative. The research on creativity is very interesting. And most of all, the parents are part of the culture. What the culture, for example, in a culture where women don't even are allowed to learn to read and write, certainly, when the opportunity, the challenge arrives, some women would rise to the occasion, even if they are handicapped by the cultural mores. But my question to you is, what do you think, also from your experience in life, for what you're saying, that we could do as a society, as a culture, as a family, as a citizen, to promote more, people that are able to raise to the occasion? Because when that happens, we all gain, not just the individual. That was clear for your example.
This ties into your question, because what strikes me, I think these are two great examples. I don't know how, is Bata there in Ukraine?
What?
The name Bata? Bata shoes?
Shoe shops.
But the shoes.
Bata.
Bata is actually very important from Czech Republic.
Well, Not anymore.
Okay.
That's my point.
But-
I first heard the name Bata when I went to India in 1971 because Bata was all over the place.
In Italy as well.
In Italy as well. And when I traveled in Europe, I saw it. And then I found out later that Bata owns 3 or 4 brands in the United States, which everybody knows, the biggest. The story Janani told is of a company that within 5 years went from being a mid-sized Czechoslovakian company to becoming the largest shoe company in the entire world. And I don't know whether you were going to tell it, but there's a sequel to this story. In World War II, the communists expropriated Bata from the parent company. They took over the whole thing. By that time, the father had died. His son escaped to Toronto. And for 3-4 years during the war, they couldn't even communicate with their overseas offices. And within 5 years after the end of the war, they were again the largest shoe company in the world. As for all I know, they may still be the largest shoe company in the world. So one of the things that comes out really powerfully here is the role of the individual. I mean, I think this is going back to what you were saying, Alberto. This didn't happen just because it was a challenge. This happened because in a horrendous challenge where the whole country and the whole business community was saying, we wash our hands, we give up, we're helpless, government must save us. One man who was derided and laughed at for it had the courage to say, no, the responsibility is mine. My business, I'm responsible. I'm not going to blame the war. I'm not going to blame the depression. I'm going to do what I can do. And he didn't just survive the crisis. It made him the largest in the world from nothing, from a company with a few hundred employees. And it's still that way today. And the same thing in the other example. C. Subramaniam, where everybody had failed and believed it was hopeless, including the agricultural scientists said, this will never work in India. No, you can't expect these foreign crops to work here and everything. One man who had the courage to think differently, who wasn't subordinate to the conventional wisdom and the social constructs of what an Indian farmer is. Indian farmer's an ignorant, uneducated, traditional guy who will never take to something new. He said, no, if I can show him it's profitable for him, and if I can assure him a market for it, that's not my understanding of the Indian farmer. He's an individual, but we have to show him the opportunity. So one man, that's the theme we started out with on the first morning, that one person can change the world. And within 10 years, this started in 66. I came to India in 71. By 1971, India announced that, as Janani said, food grain production had gone up by 50% in 5 years. India offered some foreign aid to an African country of food. And there was outrage from the West. What? A food recipient country is giving foreign aid? How is that possible? We're going to stop giving you any more aid. They didn't know they had stopped giving aid 3 years earlier. And within 10 years, it doubled its food production, which is an incredible thing. And India has been a food exporter ever since. In fact, today India is the largest exporter. I forget a couple of the food crops. It's the largest in the world today. From this point of view of having perpetual famine. So it really, one thing comes out very dramatically is the role of the individual. One individual really can make the difference in converting the crisis or the supreme challenge into an opportunity. If I think back to the stories you've told from the point of view of what I was saying yesterday about the process of accomplishment, the crisis releases energy. But what both of these people did was they gave a direction to that crisis and that panic by saying, no, we're going to do things in a different way. They came up with a plan They came up with a strategy. They came up with a goal. When C. Subramaniam went into Parliament and said, my goal is to make India food self-sufficient, they literally laughed. The parliamentarians laughed at him. We're a basket case. And you want to make us... Nobody believed it was possible. And yet they did it. But the other point that comes out was the role of organization, which I was trying to, use that analogy of the power plant. You may have the raging water in the river, but unless you can channel that effectively and convert it into power, and both the strategy that Bata did at the company level and the strategy that C. Subramaniam did at the national level with all the organizations you mentioned for fertilizer and seed production and warehousing and marketing and so forth, he channeled the energy of the nation, he channeled it in a way that gave a remarkably greater result. So from that point of view, I think these are tremendous examples of the role of the individual and how an individual can initiate a process of accomplishment that hasn't been there before. Incidentally, I just mentioned also, because just going back to what I said on the first day about Jobs, Jobs also said in that commencement speech that the most valuable experience he had in his life was the humiliating experience of getting thrown out of Apple. And he was publicly humiliated, because everybody in the country knew this story of this spoiled brat, who the professionals couldn't deal with him anymore. But, sometimes we say those things in a kind of a sentimental way. But I think there was much more truth in it than just the fact that it was a brutal experience for him. When he came back, when he was in Apple the first time, he was a genius of product design, but he was really a lousy manager, and he was a lousy production manager. When he went back to Apple in '98, the first thing he did was he implemented all the organizational innovations that Michael Dell had introduced at Dell Computers just in time and everything. He suddenly he had learned from this failure, it's not enough to make a great product. You've got to be able to make it in a low-cost, very efficient way where you manage your inventories and don't get stuck with anything. So this kind of knocked down his arrogance and made him look to see what he didn't have, what he didn't know, what skills he was missing. And so he came back really as an organization person when he came back to Apple. And that's the only reason it's still functioning and growing and profitable 5 years after he left.
And when did he learn that?
Where did
he learn that?
Well, I think he learned it from his experience. He tried at Apple and they threw him out. They said, Steve, you're a great inspiration, you're a great marketer, but you're a terrible manager, and we can't put you in charge of management. You can be here as our figurehead. And he, was too humiliated by that. Then he went to Next, and he started Next, which I mentioned. His idea at Next was, these old fogies don't know anything. If I really have my freedom, I will show them what I can do. So he created everything he wanted to do, he did at Next with total freedom. He made the factory into a piece of art, painted the walls and the equipment, the robotic equipment, made it world-class factory to produce 40,000 computers a month, and he could only sell 400. So he learned from spending his own money, losing his own money. He got humiliated again. He made a great product, but he couldn't put it all together. And I think he had the courage and the sense to learn from those mistakes and really see what he needed to be successful. So that's the point you were making yesterday about the fully functional individual and the who has that. The narrative is that he can learn from his mistakes. Jobs did learn from his mistakes. Oh, there's a question, a show?
Janani said that a challenge, if successfully tackled, can turn into an opportunity. But I think we have to make a distinction between economic challenges and physical challenges. If you accept a physical challenge, like the world is now facing the challenge of global warming, requiring urgent action from the governments of the world. Even if it is successfully tackled, I don't see how it will give rise to new opportunities that didn't exist before. At best, a danger has come, and that danger has been successfully managed, and the danger disappears. If there is any positive result, the result is that the world has managed to retain whatever living space it was previously enjoying. How do you propose that the successful tackling of physical challenge gives rise to extra opportunities that didn't exist before? I don't follow that connection.
The question was, okay, it may work for economic situations that a challenge can be converted into an opportunity, but is the same thing really true for physical challenges like the challenge of global warming? First, I think we have to question whether the challenge between global warming is really that much more physical than the problem of producing shoes or food. I mean, if you want to say there's a physical challenge, food production was also a physical challenge. But the problem of global warming is very much the result of human behavior, human institutions, the way we incentivize our society. It's going to be hard for us we can't take global warming and prove that it's an opportunity beforehand. It'll be much clearer after the fact that it's a great opportunity. You know, the internet was originally developed by what they call DARPA, a U.S. defense organization, defense research organization, because they were concerned about the command and control of nuclear weapons. And they spent money and gave money to universities to develop an electronic remote control system so that the U.S. could control its network of nuclear weapons, then in the tens of thousands, all from computers, centrally controlled. But what came out of that? What came out of that was something totally different, a system where we can reach the whole remote world and the whole remote world can meet us. I mean, I could, speculate as a possibility that if we really wanted, and there are others who are much more informed about this than I am, but if we wanted to really shift over from oil and coal to renewable energy, and if the whole world decided to do that, we could probably produce solar energy at a much cheaper rate than what we're producing our fossil fuel-based energy now. And in fact, the U.S. and several other countries have actually raised tariffs and penalty tariffs on the Chinese export of solar energy panels because they're doing it too cheaply. And we might find that we can bring down drastically the cost of energy by tapping this infinite source that's there from the sun without any pollution at all, and it can never be exhausted. And it doesn't require us wasting our precious water resources on fracking and pumping that into the ground and everything else. So I'm sure there are technologists who will tell us that this can be converted into an opportunity as well. If I had a little more presence of mind, I'm sure I could think of some examples from the past that would illustrate this. I don't think there's any fundamental difference. I mean, Malthus said 2,200 years ago that essentially there was a limit to human population because the earth could only produce so much food. And that sounds pretty much like a physical challenge. I don't think they get much more physical than that. And what happened? That was when the world's population was just about 1 billion people. Now we have 7 billion people. And most of those 7 billion are much better fed than the billion were 200 years ago. And we're still increasing our food production. So I'm not convinced that there's a valid distinction between what you're calling an economic and a physical challenge. Any other comment?
In fact, because of this global warming, there is a lot of research into the use of solar energy, wind energy, harnessing the wind to produce energy. They're all clean energies and hydroelectric energy. So it is encouraging research, use, development of new products in this.
Anyway, it's a question that provokes thought. I think if we think about it, we'll come up with more examples as we go on.
There is one example of a physical problem. This was in the Himalayan regions. There are a lot of these pine trees, and the pine needles, when they fall and they dry, they result in forest fire a good deal. So actually what one man did was he went to these Himalayan regions, he found this problem, and so he said, why not collect all these pine needles, burn them and use them to convert this into electricity. There is the entire ground is covered with these pine needles, and so you need somebody to collect them. It provides women with employment. And then he set up these small oven-like furnaces where it can be burned, and that needed some amount of work in the beginning, and then regularly you need to operate it. So he got some of the local youth, educated them, trained them on how to operate this, and this produces electricity for the villages on these hilly regions. One furnace is enough to light up one village. And so actually the forest fire was converted into electricity, into employment for the people. And when there is more prosperity, it also helped people get educated better, and it prevented the forest fire. So sometimes directly out of a problem, when it's a physical problem, can come great opportunities.
Sweta?
Ranjani has a question, but she is without a headset, so I'm going to read it out for her.
Okay.
She asks, throughout history, the greatest accomplishments have taken place because of crisis which propelled people into action, be it an inferiority complex or an external pressure. It looks like people have always wanted pressure from outside. So in this context, shouldn't individuality ideally be self-propelled instead of being motivated by external or internal pressure?
I'll repeat the question first. Throughout history, great accomplishment seems to have come through crises. What does it take in order for those accomplishments to come without the crises?
I'd just like to add this one point. It is true throughout history that great progress has come out of great challenges, whether it's war. After World War II, there was the founding of the UN plus industrial growth in Europe and America. It has taken challenges to actually lead to growth, but that is not the only way. That is where values come in. Instead of waiting for a crisis from outside, when we actually internalize the discipline, instead of waiting for somebody to impose it on us, when there are values, that is the sunlit path. But we do seem to be waiting for the crisis to propel us.
I think the real requirement for a great breakthrough is the intense energy. Because human beings tend to be, we are easily contented, that it often takes a crisis to generate release the energy needed for a great accomplishment. But I think Ranjani, if you think back, you'll find also that there are many great progressive steps that have happened not because of a crisis. The opening up of North America was because of a huge undiscovered landmass and a vast territory available for people. It's true that many of the immigrants were running away from crisis. It's equally true that many more were running towards an opportunity that they saw. In the early 80s, it was not a crisis that compelled the growth of the personal computer industry that propelled Apple and other companies up. It was a technological opportunity, the development of the microprocessor by Texas Instruments and Intel, and the cheap electronics that made possible an enormous creativity. It's true that we could say that the United Nations was born out of two horrendous world wars and the fear that, we want to avoid a third. It can also be say that it may be true to a large extent that the EU was born out of 500 years of warfare, incessant warfare in Europe. But you can also say that the EU was born out of the fact that after 1950, the value of having a large federated society like the United States, the U.S. was always looked down on by Europe until the end of World War II, and by that time, the model of this huge country without borders, with a common currency, without tariff barriers between things and passports between them, was a positive model and inspiration for Europe that said, we can rise to this level. It wasn't a crisis so much, though there may have been some compelling circumstances. So I think that the commonality between the crisis and opportunity is that in each case it takes an individual or many individuals who are able to think differently and act differently and not just be limited by the present social construction or the present narrative, to think that things could be different. For Jobs, there was a new narrative. He said, instead of the machine is going to take us over, I want a machine that will empower us. I want a machine that's going to make us all more free and independent than before. And he was inspired by that vision, and he really made it a reality in the world. So if it's true, and I can agree that I think there's a truth in it, we have to study it statistically, but I think if you say that historically a disproportionate number of the great progresses have come in response to challenges, probably that was much more true in the past than it is today. Because in the past, society was more conservative. We were more concerned about preserving what we had, and we were threatened. One of the things that came out, maybe, Ranjani, it was your research, I don't remember, but the steam engine, the power of the steam engine was actually discovered about 2,000 years ago. It was known in Roman times, it was known in Egyptian times, but they refused to use it. Because of this fear of this thing, it wasn't used at that time. Even when the power of the steam engine was used in weaving, in textile industry in Europe, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, there was huge resistance to this. This machine is going to wipe out our profession as hand loom weavers. There was tremendous social resistance. So I would say today I would think, and of course I'm not quantifying, I'm not backing it up by data, I'm backing it up by an intuition. I think today in the world we are much more capable as a society of progressing towards opportunities rather than only changing when we're absolutely compelled. One of the things I like about the story of Pride and Prejudice is in France, the aristocracy absolutely refused to change. Their heads literally had to be cut off because they said, no, we are going to hang on to what we have, and this is the way the world order must be. This is the narrative. We're on top and everybody else lives for us. But in England, what happened? In England, the aristocracy, sensing the danger, sensing the possibility of social revolution, said, look, we're willing to give way. We're willing to intermarry. We're willing to give a chance for those who accomplish and earn a lot of money to come up and even buy land, even acquire titles. We're willing for a social evolution to avoid a social revolution. In the past, radical change has always required a revolution because the status quo doesn't want to give up. The very fact that the Cold War ended peacefully, even if it hasn't gone as far as we want, itself is a remarkable thing. So these are good areas for further research, and I'm really glad you asked it. It makes us think. And I think if you go back to what Alberto was saying yesterday and the day before about the social milieu in which the fully functional individual thrives, you will see that that's also the milieu in which we are more capable of responding positively to the opportunities without waiting until we're absolutely compelled to by impending disaster. So what's true for the individual, the more fully functional individual is much more capable of responding to opportunities and not waiting until he's pushed into a corner and he absolutely is compelled to change in order to survive. I think that same is true for the society. The fully functional society, or whatever we wish to call it, is one that's much more capable of seeing the opportunities and not waiting until we're back to the wall and we're polluting ourselves out of existence. It's a very thought-provoking question. Thank you, Janani.
Sir?
Yes, Sweta.
I have a question.
Go ahead, please.
When we understand that we are about to face a crisis, we have the information. We know that we are going to be in it, and we have to come up with something. But the first time we hear about the crisis, we are filled with fear, a sense of devastation, the losses that we are going to face, and it just shakes us. It is very difficult to actually look at it from an outsider's point of view, what is to be done. So what is the right attitude for a person when he comes to know about a crisis, or he's informed of a big crisis that he's going to face?
Did you hear the question? She's saying that first, a normal human tendency when we're faced with a crisis is to be filled with fear and insecurity. And obviously, as we've been saying, that's not resulting in a positive response. So she's asking, what is the right response an individual should give to a crisis in order to be able to respond to it and whether solve it or convert it into an opportunity? Is that the question, Sweta?
That's correct, sir.
Okay. Alberto, would you like to discuss?
From my point of view, the right amount of fear. Because fear is an adaptive system that will activate an adrenaline response and start the juice flowing. Instead, if it's an excessive amount of fear, that would flood my organism and would make me impotent. So, in movies and all that, we have the hero that is fearless. That's not humans. That's not wise. That's dangerous. Not to have fear is very dangerous. It's not good for survival. But to have too much fear is no good either. So you have to have an equilibrium that I think is pretty much been tested for for thousands and thousands of years, because these are adaptive, evolutionary traits. So what I would say a precious ingredient is what we would actually try to get rid of, that is fear. To have the right amount of fear, put you enables you to, use an optimal of resources.
And when you say I'd like to understand that better. When you say the right amount of fear, I think, what is fear doing? Fear does two things. Fear makes us aware of a situation which we might otherwise not pay attention to. And fear generates a motivation for avoidance. And clearly, that awareness and that motivation are essential for tackling a problem. My question is, not theoretically, but I'm just wondering, is it possible, can we find instances of people who had those two criteria, who had the awareness and had the total motivation, but didn't have it out of fear? Because we can use the word fear to be a psychological condition that paralyzes us, or a mental So I'm thinking of Churchill in World War II.
But
he was afraid at one level.
But that's exactly the point. That's well made and maybe making clear. Only courageous people are the people that they use fear in an optimal, excellent way. Because fear is, a mechanism, whole mechanism to harness all our response. And you mentioned it run away. Well, not necessarily. Fear might prompt you to spring into attack, right, or whatever. But not to experience fears is very dangerous for your health.
So I like your definition of courage is the capacity to harness our fear constructively rather than be paralyzed by it.
Absolutely.
It's a good question. Some of the people I mentioned yesterday about Washington, and I think you had some other examples of this courage. You want to give them?
During a battle, 2 of his horses were shot out from underneath him. He still went ahead. There were times when his soldiers were afraid and they were going backwards. But he ran in front, he reined in his horse, he froze in front of the enemy to rally his forces.
I remember reading one instance in which his aide said, General, the enemy's attacking, they're coming pretty close, I think we better go back and he said, if you're afraid, you can go. And the very fact that he stood there while the bullets are flying around and people are being shot, finally compelled his own soldiers who wanted to run away to feel embarrassed by their fear and to turn around and reverse the situation and attack. I gave that anecdote yesterday. Somehow I read it some 30 years ago. It just captured my imagination. When Churchill became the prime minister and he was running his first cabinet meeting and the news came to him that France had capitulated, and he turns and says, gentlemen, now we're all alone. Isn't it exhilarating? He used to go up on the rooftops of Paris during the bombing, when the Luftwaffe was bombing, and he would be shaking his fist at them while everybody else is down there. But he inspired the whole nation by that courage. But Churchill for 10 years before the war was warning the government and the country that the Germans are arming, and at least for the 5 years, he was the one outspoken person who was warning that we have to be afraid. But his fear, it wasn't a visceral fear. I think physically he was fearless. And if you hear the stories of what he did in his youth, he didn't know physical fear, but he certainly understood the threat to the country, and he was the most outspoken person in trying to warn about that. So anyway, the combination of the two is a very interesting thing.
This just shows the man's courage here. This is in the middle of the Second World War when the Battle of Britain has just begun and the German Air Force is bombing England. The rest of Europe has surrendered, but Churchill says, we shall never surrender. He has decided what he's going to do. He doesn't say, oh, what's going to happen? We are outnumbered. The British army, the pilots were outnumbered. Germans were training 800 pilots every week, and in Britain it was 200. And he said, we shall never surrender. And this actually rallied the entire country. This is a clip from the movie. So, the French were numerically superior to the English army. It was said that the French nobles, they wanted to be in the front lines. They all said, we want to be in the front. Usually the ones in the front get killed. But here they were in a hurry to be in the front because they wanted to be the ones who would defeat the English. They outnumbered the English 5-1. The English had been fighting for months. They were tired. They were all, the English soldiers, they were all waiting to go back home, and they had marched 260 miles in 2 weeks, and they were all tired, they were weak, they had gone without food. The French were better archers, they were better trained even, and they had some 12,000 men, and they outnumbered the English 5-1, and in spite of the great odds, it was King Henry V. This was the day of Crispin, and he inspired his soldiers. These soldiers who were weak, who were tired, who were waiting to go back home, who were pessimistic. They were afraid. They said, "These people outnumber us 5-1. We're going to be defeated." And just by speaking to them, by inspiring them with his courage, he said, "Everybody will remember this day of Crispin, as the day in which we all were honored." They would all wish that they were part of our group. They would all wish later on that they were here to fight with us. And the way he inspired his people, in spite of the great odds, England won. The French casualties were between 5,000 and 10,000 men. It was never recorded clearly, but they lost almost all of the men. And incredibly, the English lost only 100 men. It was just this man, this King Henry V, who inspired everybody. Everybody was afraid. You see such a large force, they are well trained, they outnumber you 5-1, and they are all rushing to be in front. All the French nobles, they said, we want to be in the front because we want all the honor. They thought the honor of killing the English and winning the battle.
And they were all fresh troops, and the English had been fighting for months and were exhausted and trying to go home, and now they were cornered. It's called the Battle of Agincourt, if you look it up. It's Shakespeare immortalized it in this speech. It's in War and Peace, Tolstoy describes one of the battles in which the Russian army won against great odds like this, and he says, he has a beautiful passage, and he says that in all of military warfare there's something that can't be by the book. It's something called the spirit of the army, which can turn even the most impossible situation into the reverse. And that's the role that the great leader plays. He has that capacity to, that's what Churchill did, that's what Washington did, that's what all great military leaders have done. And that's what great political and business leaders, or a Martin Luther King or a Mahatma Gandhi, they have that capacity to inspire, bring out the positive and the best in us. I'm saying best in this point of view, from that context, to bring out something that none of us have when we're on our own and just worried about saving our lives. It's from Henry V. Yes, Sweta?
Ashok sir has a question.
Okay. Hey, go ahead, Ashok.
I would like to refer to your presentation yesterday where I didn't get a chance to fully deliver my questions.
Okay.
Yesterday you took the stand that if only humanity fully exercised its rational powers, the world will be truly free of most of the problems it is facing now. In other words, you were telling me that man's rationality is enough to tackle the problems he is facing, and humanity doesn't need any other I don't know what to say, supra-rational agency to guide his life. All right, supposing let us agree that man's rational powers are enough to manage his affairs. In that case, is there any such thing as a rational solution for the Arab-Israeli problem? If you say the man's rationality is enough to manage his affairs, then there should be a rational solution to the Arab-Israeli problem. Is there really any such thing as a rational solution to the Arab-Israeli problem that will bring permanent peace to that region? That region is very much troubled now. It has been like that for last 40, 50 years. If rationality is enough to manage man's affairs, then the rational solution to the Arab-Israeli problem should be one that brings peace to that region. Is there any such rational solution to that problem?
Well, did you follow the question? No? Okay. The question is, yesterday Ashok asked whether we need some kind of a supra-rational means of knowledge, since obviously rationality has not proven sufficient to solve all our problems, and my comment to him had been that actually what I said then, Ashok, was that leave alone higher forms of knowledge. It's a topic I'm going to come to tomorrow. I think there's little evidence to support the view that we're using all our rational faculties in an effective way, and therefore we need not worry about when we really get to the limits of rationality. By all means, let's transcend them. But most of our problems can be saved simply because we are not rational. We are acting in a very irrational way. That was what I said yesterday, and you're asking, if that's the case, if rationality has the capacity to solve our problems, what about the Arab-Israeli problem, which is so intractable and has been resisting solution up until now? Is there a rational solution to that problem? I'm not going to attempt to answer it. I'm not an expert on the problem. I'm only going to say two things. I think it's very clear, and I think everybody will agree, I think so anyway, that the way we're trying to solve the problem of the Arab-Israeli conflict now is not a rational solution. And it has no hope of solving the problem, and it hasn't solved the problem up until now. And we've had a similar discussion about the confrontation between Russia and the West over Ukraine. Whatever is the solution, the way we've been going about it, the solution we chose for dealing with the Taliban in Afghanistan and dealing with Saddam Hussein in Iraq or dealing with Assad in Syria, none of these have proven successful, and I think to many people, none of them are very rational. Keeping 70,000 nuclear warheads, to me, disqualifies from any thought about rationality. Now, to go specifically to your issue of the Arab-Israeli conflict, and I think it's a great question for the World Academy. We are interested in it. Ivo and Goran, who's here with us, just came back from Israel, and maybe he can answer this for us. Maybe he came up with that solution. And that would be really worth discussing, not only here, but within the academy. I would just say that it's clear that the solution we have, what we're doing now, is not a solution, and it's not rational. I could imagine that the world comes together with a program to elevate the entire Palestine region, in Israel and otherwise, to raise the standard of living there to the level of Singapore, for example. And if the whole world wants to put its resources, its technology, and its capabilities there to raise living standards in that region, it's a tiny area and it's a tiny population, we certainly can do that. It's not irrational to say we have the capacity to do it. I think we'd be much further along on the way to a solution than we are today, or we are by the present means. Beyond that, I require further thought. Goran, would you like to comment on that?
Thank you for this possibility. Really to understand what everything happened in Palestine, it's not easy, because you need to try to think on the way the people they living there, and this is of course different way. Not only the people from Palestine, it's the people from Israel too. But in the case of Palestine, we have many actors. Many of them are international actors, and it's not only the case between the possibility of negotiation between the Israelis and the Palestine, negotiation dialogues, because we have many dialogues already, these kind of dialogues between these two nations. But I think the most important problem in the case of Palestine is actually international community, especially some international actors. They have some interests. These all interests are not always the best way. The best for Palestine is fair for the world. So
you agree that what we're doing is not.
It's not enough.
It's not enough, and it's not a rational solution.
No, it's not a rational solution. Sure. No.
So anyway, we take the question as a challenge to the Academy, Ashok, and we'll see whether we can create a forum to at least think through a rational solution to the problem. It's a very challenging question. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Let us conclude this.
Okay, your conclusion.
Yes. This is a concept in the martial arts where you take the momentum from the attack of the opponent and you redirect it and use it against that person. So I just want to conclude with this one image that we can hold in mind. A challenge is not something that's diametrically opposite to an opportunity. Maybe there is something in the challenge that we can change something in us and use it to change the situation. So we convert it. We not only solve the problem, we convert it into an opportunity. Thank you.
Very thought-provoking. Thank you.